Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington.
And I'm Chris McCurry. And today we are privileged to have with us Dr. Dennis Tirch. Dennis is the founder of the Center for Compassion-Focused Therapy in New York, the first compassion-focused therapy clinical training center in the United States. He's one of the world's leading authorities on the science of compassion and has spent over 4 decades exploring it, not just as a clinician, but as a contemplative practitioner. He's trained thousands of therapists globally, written 7 books, including The Compassionate Mind Guide to Overcoming Anxiety and the ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Compassion, which is one of my favorite books. And his work sits right at the intersection of compassion-focused therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and Buddhist psychology. Dennis, welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks, Emma. It's a real honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you. I'm really looking forward to exploring some of these ideas together today.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to it as well. I wanted to start off by actually reading a couple of quotes that you have at the beginning of this book, The Practitioner's Guide. One from Nelson Mandela and one from one of my favorite poets, Charles Bukowski. So Mandela says, "Our human compassion binds us to one another, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future." Wonderful quote there. And then Bukowski, from the sublime to the ridiculous.
Yeah.
"We're all going to die. All of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing." And Bukowski died in 94, 10 years before Facebook. And I would love to know what he might think about TikTok and Facebook and the barrage of trivialities that we're getting in day-to-day life these days, and how that has clearly made us more isolated, even though we all can talk to one another across different continents. There's this alienation and I think a lack of compassion. And I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this, Dennis.
I think those 2 quotes, they kind of sit in a similar place in my mind and heart, in that there is something that's really available to us. And sometimes the automaticity of life and the reactivity, the sort of autopilot that we can be on, occludes that, or it's just not really right there for us. The connections we have together, the things that really matter very deeply to us in terms of loving awareness, compassion, and appreciating life as we have it, the time we have here on earth. And for me, ACT, really good psychotherapy, compassion-focused work, any liberatory path has a lot to do with coming home to our nature rather than trying to superimpose something on our nature. Those are just the initial thoughts that you've provoked in my mind there with the reminding me of those quotes.
Compassion, I think, is a greatly misunderstood word. And you must experience this a lot in your teaching and your writing and the training that you do. What are some common misconceptions about compassion, and how do you define it?
Well, there's a way that I could answer that would be very consistent with compassion-focused therapy theory or ACT theory. And those are good. It's a good way to answer it. It's not a bad way to answer it, which is to say that the definition of compassion that we use, it involves a sensitivity to the presence of suffering in ourselves and in others, coupled with a dedication, a commitment to do something about that suffering. So it's a blend of awareness and orientation of your consciousness, and then a preparedness and a commitment to take action. And there's so much to that definition. We could do a whole day on those 2 dimensions of a motive. But I actually think it's even deeper and kind of different than that when we use compassion in psychotherapy. I think there's a quality of being that is really hard to give a name to, a quality of being and doing that is an embodied motive to nurture, to care, to protect, and to sustain life and collaborative relatedness to like, there's something that is very close to psychological flexibility, the definition of psychological flexibility from ACT, that's very close to the definition of secure attachment, that shows up in the idea of awakening compassion in contemplative traditions in the Dharma, and that bottom embodied state of wisdom, strength, courage, commitment, and clear seeing of the necessity of engagement with the world to protect and sustain life. That, to me, is what compassion points to. It's sort of, it's even more than a definition. It's like what the symbol of the word stands for. And I think the best I've ever seen in humans through psychotherapy or coaching or personal growth, the best of us is when we're operating from embodying that state that we could probably, compassion comes pretty close to what that is.
I was thinking about embodying that state in the day-to-day and how hard it is. I actually was talking to my sons about compassion last night. I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter.
Awesome.
And I asked them, what is compassion? And my eldest said, oh, it's so woke. It's so woke, like it's a bad thing. He then said, no, I'm joking. But it stayed with me. It stayed with me because I'm thinking there is something about compassion that, as you describe it, feels so wonderful and warm and the way we would like to be. You mentioned it's coming home to our nature, but actually it's rather difficult to embody. And his comment that it's woke, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, he's a teenager, who knows what was happening behind that comment, but that there is something about it that feels a little, perhaps dangerous or not the right thing to do or naive. I was wondering if you could speak to that part too.
Well, I think he's right, actually. I think it's a very legitimate perspective on a number of levels. Like, the first level at which he's right is submissive compassion, or this sort of like perhaps a misplaced compassion that sounds like it's coming from a place of compassion, but is actually more about trying to appease a potential threat. And one of the things that's really useful in understanding Paul Gilbert's work and the work in the compassion-focused therapy community and the evolved psychology of compassion is to recognize, and this for me was a game changer as a therapist, as a human being, it's just such a game changer to recognize that humans have evolved to be able to stabilize and ground our experience of distress and threat through the activation of warmth and affiliation and care and attachment. Like when my daughter we were at an Easter egg hunt, and there was something yet on Sunday. It's a Eastern Orthodox Easter, I think, was Sunday, but it was just a sort of a cross-cultural, non-denominational spring looking for eggs hunt that was taking place in our community. So all the kids are going, and she's 7, so she's got her little ears on her head. She's adorable. She's sweet. But it bothered her that the shiny eggs that we had brought, she didn't find any of those. And so it was incredibly distressing to her in a way that for a more developed nervous system wouldn't be that distressing. But the idea of social comparison or threat or fairness or equity or whether she'd had a chance or whether she'd failed at something, like this wonderful little nervous system was so flooded with so many multifarious interpretations of why this was a total catastrophe that she hadn't found the eggs that she thought she ought to find. But the one thing that really got me from it, whereas it would have been very easy to hear and maybe dismiss if I were like a curmudgeonly grumpy version of myself, or if I'd never had been around kids, and I don't have to be a parent to be around kids or have a heart, obviously, but I could imagine a version of myself would be, that kid's being entitled, she wants what she wants, or grumpy. But then I heard her say, those were the eggs from my family. Those were the eggs that were special for us, and I couldn't even find one. And when I held her and she felt close and she felt like she was connected to her family, to provision of care, to safeness, to love, that things were going to be all right. You could see the way her parasympathetic engagement increased, her rest and digest and tend and befriend nervous system was there. She became calmer, safer, more playful. She rode the waves of that distress. And that's how we learn to deal with distress. That's how we learn to downregulate our nervous system. And then as adults, hopefully, when we feel frightened or disappointed or scared or sad, we're able to find courage, find groundedness, find stability through our experience of warmth and feeling loving and loved or caring and cared for. And then that's just baked in. That's just baked into our repertoires. It's baked into who we are. It's baked into how we operate in the world. And sometimes when people are talking about compassion or even acting from a place of compassion or empathy, that's not really what's happening. They're saying that they're operating from. I was kind of surprised. There's a Elon Musk and Gad Saad and some people had thrown around this term that like empathy was misplaced. Empathy is what they really ought to have said, but was toxic for societies when people like, and Paul Gilbert and a number of people in the CFT community were outraged. They're like, this is an example of these right-wing people who are all saying empathy is bad. They're saying empathy is bad. They're saying compassion is bad. They're evil. And you might think that, and that's okay. Maybe you don't like those guys or you do, and it's absolutely singularly unimportant to me, like for this conversation. But what shocked me about that response is I've been listening for 20 years to the very same people say, compassion can be submissive. Compassion can be a strategy to appease aggressors. Compassion can be not real compassion. And empathy often can be misplaced. And heard Paul say things like, would you rather have a non-empathic torturer or an empathic torturer? Well, the empathy doesn't mean you're actually caring. Empathy is your ability to hold someone else's mind in your mind and anticipate their needs. And I thought, could it be that even we in the CFT community, even us in the ACT community, even those of us who are progressive or liberal or what, even we can sort of have our vision kind of blurred by our own political affiliations, by our own tribalism? And I think we all know the answer to that. So that doesn't mean that Elon Musk is right or wrong, but what it means is that when your son says compassion can be woke, what I hear in that is that he's noticing that people can use what they can attach the label of compassion or empathy to lots of different things that are actually moves that involve defenses or experiential avoidance or fears. And that real compassion is accessing something kind of different, like not just quantitatively different, but qualitatively different, like a very courageous, strong, loving part of us that is ready to face whatever life deals with us, because we're all going to die. What a circus. We can love one another. We can hold our difficult feelings in the service of something really magical, which is to take care of each other. That's so good on your son. He's got a good idea there.
Yes, he does. I probably won't tell him what we discussed about it because he's loves to be a contrarian, as his good adolescent brain is sort of doing for us all. But he has some fabulous insights. I often quote him in our conversations because I'll bring it up just to see his perspective, because absolutely what you're saying is so true. We are so human, and often I do love adolescents. Often they remind us of how human we are.
I do want to just really briefly, and just to throw this in here because I know that some of the things I said on purpose could be activating for the largely left-leaning cohort that will be listening to us. obviously the term woke is a little bit charged, and obviously even the names of people I'm using, like Elon Musk or whatever it is. But I think that's kind of important, like that we can hold all of it. We can hold our varied responses. But I just didn't want to let that go by without at least acknowledging that.
Well, sure. And it would be unprincipled to start excluding certain people. I mean, it's like anybody who does a loving kindness meditation and might be sending loving kindness out to Elon Musk or somebody, but we do it because that is the kind of energy we want to put out into the world and we want to walk around with every day.
Yeah, I remember Ram Dass saying that in this, I'm dating myself, but in the 80s and 90s, Ram Dass talking about having Caspar Weinberger, who was this sort of like right-wing American politician, and he'd have it on his altar. It was like the Buddha, Jesus, Neem Karoli Baba, Caspar Weinberger. And then later in his life, even Donald Trump, he would sort of say like, well, these are my teachers. They're teaching me how to be loving. And for some people, that might be Donald Trump, who's like this sort of evil incarnate, that how can I look at this person and hold them with loving awareness? And for others, it might be Keir Starmer, or it might be Vladimir Putin, or whoever it is, or Milei in Argentina. But it's easy to be compassionate for people that you like or dislike. Real compassion, I think, transcends those personal preferences and gets to something deeper, not because it's right or because it's pretty or it's how you should be, but because it's a superpower. Accesses a part of your mind. They call it bodhisattva, as you guys know in the Dharma, the inherently arising altruistic aspiration for the liberation of suffering of all beings, all parts of ourselves, the parts of ourselves we don't like, the people we don't like, to wish all of those beings and aspects of who we are to come into a place of grace and awakening so that we can all rise together. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing.
It's like my wife really likes Julian of Norwich, the mystic, and Julian of Norwich said that, in the end, even the devil will be saved.
Got my vote.
But I think that speaks to what you were talking about, the embodied nature of compassion, which kind of gets past labels and even definitions and words themselves. So how do we manifest that? How do we live that without getting too hung up on verbiage?
You know what I really like about that question is it gets into it's a very behaviorist kind of question in a good way. It gets into the how, not just the what, but the how. And I think we have a lot of good technology and wisdom about how. And so like we know that when our minds are organized by compassion, that we will have better functioning across like all of our systems, your immune system functioning, heart rate variability, levels of depression, levels of prosocial engagement, but also like psychological flexibility, decision-making, the ability to overcome anxiety. When we train up that capacity that we can call compassion, some really great things happen. And I think there's one of the things I really like about compassion-focused ACT and the sort of blending of ACT technologies and compassion-focused technologies is that we can work from the ground up or from the sky down, meaning you can have an image of a compassionate being and have a clarity of authorship of what you value and what matters to you and how you understand that compassion. And you can use practices that have been adapted from Vajrayana Buddhism and other world religions that are empirically validated, that involve imagery and rehearsing being the version of yourself that you most wish to be, so that you're practicing embodying that quality. And when people's minds and bodies are like embodying caregiving, care receiving algorithms and compassion, all those good qualities show up, all those desirable things like decision-making and flexibility. That's great. We know that from the literature, even on the neuroscience of the neurobiology of attachment. And sometimes you can work not from the sky down, but from the ground up. And you can identify these are the processes and competencies of a compassionate mind. As far as what we have seen, they are very akin to the processes you see in psychological flexibility. So part of what we do early on in working with clients, whether they're clients who have lifelong history of depression or whether they're clients who are coaching for performance and as elite athletes, is we look at, given somebody's personal history, given their attachment history, where are the hooks? Where are the patterns of avoidance and over control? What needs to be liberated? What needs to be cultivated? And then going through like your ability to contact the present moment with sensitivity to what is required to suffering, the ability to defuse from categorical evaluative judgmental thinking so you can come from a more non-judgmental place, the ability to tolerate difficult states of mind, your capacity for empathy and sympathy for self and other. So you can actually identify with someone what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they can cultivate all those different bits. So it's a little bit like working with a personal trainer. You can look at your let's say you're a footballer or a soccer player or wherever your language about it. You can learn the game, you can learn the skill, you can practice the game and you get better at it. Or you could also work on passing, work on shooting, work on dribbling, and you can then go even more granular. This is my range of motion. This is my mobility. This is my strength. This is my endurance. This is my flexibility. You can cultivate all those qualities. So I think compassion-focused therapy and compassion-focused ACT, we want to be able to go from like an overall gestalt, like embodying it that you train, to then looking at each of the different competencies, training up all those competencies, and then playing the game, which could be exposure and response prevention. It could be going on a job interview. It could be showing up and going to a parent-teacher conference or like whatever life is really asking of you. So there are really specific, not abstract at all, places where the rubber hits the road, where we can actually reliably and repeatedly help people to cultivate compassion and overcome their fears and anxieties.
I'm sure that went by very quickly for some of our listeners. If you could pick one of those capacities and maybe dig a little deeper into how you would train that up, what would be a great example?
I think the one I like most in response to that question, but one I really lean into a lot as a clinician and as a supervisor, trainer, coach, is in fact empathy. And I don't mean compassion overall. I don't mean the embodied motive to care and give and receive care. And I don't mean sympathy or like affective empathy. I mean something closer to those of us in the ACT world and contextual behavior science, closer to theory of mind. You can, if you're a layperson, you might Google these ideas, or do we call it dialectic framing in this sort of radical behaviorist tribe we're a part of? And so it's theory of mind, dialectic framing, mentalization. There's similar ideas, but what it basically means is how can I view the world through the eyes of Chris or Emma? How can I imagine what it would be like to be them and use this fascinating parallel processing, pattern recognition oriented of human mental behavior, mental life, where we can build a working model so that we can see through the eyes of another person. And one of the reasons I really like to work with that and train it is you can do it lots of ways. You can ask people questions like, well, if you were me and I were you, what would it be like? What would it be like? Like, we won't actually do this right now but if I had said, well, hey, Chris, imagine you're Dennis and I'm Chris, and I asked you that question about which one of the capacities or competencies you'd like to talk about. What would be going through your mind if you were me? And it's such an extraordinary exchange, whether it's in a psychotherapy moment or a coaching moment, or even when we do contemplative like imagery practices. And that's so much because it was like 20 years before ever becoming a therapist, I was practicing those kind of Buddhist exercises, just quirks of my upbringing. And when you're imagining what it's like to be the bodhisattva of compassion, or you're imagining what it's like to see the world through the eyes of Avalokiteshvara, which means the one who hears the cries of the world, what would that be like? Or if you're imagining like, oh, I've said something rude to my spouse. Well, I'm right. I had to say that. I was angry. They were an hour late. and we had a place to go, so I was grumpy. Like, what would it be like to be them? What would it be like to feel that, to hear that? So there's so many different ways and so many different exercises and practices for multiple exemplar training, which is nerd speak for like learning something lots of different ways in different settings so you really get it. And I think when people get that flexible perspective taking thing and they can adopt perspectives, it also allows them to cultivate that real wise mind, like Buddha's eye view on themselves, like calm abiding in the natural state of like their Buddha nature, their awakened nature. So now my flexible perspective can be on my awareness itself. What is it like to be aware? If I was just pure awareness, looking at my awareness, what would that be like? I think that there's so much you can do. I mean, there's like 6 to 12 of these different competencies. So there's different ways of slicing and dicing them. But that one is my go-to when my back is up against the wall in a session or something, or in my personal life. It's like, slow down, slow your breathing, feel your feet beneath you, connect with physical sensation, shift your perspective, see the world from this different point of view. And so much just arrives. It's crazy.
I mean, that's been a lot of my work with kids and parents, is trying to get to do the mentalizing, and that, which I think of as interpersonal mindfulness, where it's like, how is this person thinking, feeling right now? And that gets us out of that threat system where all I can think about is what I need in the moment. But kind of bridging that gap and just even attempting to do that, I think in a way kind of just breaks the spell of one's stirred up emotions and drives and needs, and to be able to say, okay, I'm going to bridge this gap and find out what this other person is all about at this moment, and hold that stuff of mine lightly so that I can do that.
Well, you really point to something really important there, but please, Emma, didn't mean to step on.
I'm always struck by how much easier it is for me to feel compassion towards my clients than, maybe family members or friends. And I've thought about it a lot. We've talked about it on the podcast that, why is that? And it is because I'm giving them time to empathize. I have a sense of what life is like for them behind their eyes and what they say, in a way that we don't necessarily give other people time. We're more defended against, we're more threatened by. And I can't remember if was it Maya Angelou? Gosh, I'm butchering this, but somebody had a beautiful quote saying, you can never, it was Brené Brown, you never dislike anybody close up.
It's very good.
Yes. And it is calling to that, skill around developing our ability to empathize, even towards those people who, can feel confronting. And like my, son said, that sort of concern around submissive compassion. Like, if I empathize with them, I'm agreeing, or if I empathize with them, I'm making what they say right in the world. But it sounds like you're talking to something different.
Well, I love where this is going today, this conversation. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you both are bringing to our exchange right now. And it's to be really fair to all of us. What happens when we're experiencing threat? Like, what did evolution set us up quite rightly to do is to focus on the threat. Because if you designed a species that didn't default to survival and protection, the species wouldn't survive. Most species don't survive anyway. It's really hard to survive as a species, There's, what has it been, like 4, as we're in our 4th mass extinction, and it sounds like, an environmental catastrophe, which I'm sure is a part of it, but just what happens, like planet, on a planet like this, the species doesn't work out most of the time, So what you absolutely need to do is have repertoire narrowing and attentional narrowing in the presence of threats. So activation of our threat systems, our threat repertoires, inherently pulls for psychological inflexibility and attentional inflexibility and behavioral inflexibility, which is exactly what's supposed to happen. And what's kind of wonderful about humans is we also have this experience of social safeness, emotional safeness, and collaboration, because we're awfully safe when we're together as humans. We're not safe on our own. As like Kelly Wilson likes to say, a lone monkey is a dead monkey, you know, like, and humans, we're even more vulnerable. So of course, it's hard to have empathy and hard to mentalize when you don't feel safe. It's baked into the mechanism, to the process. It's baked into the organism rather than a mechanism. It's better to say organism, you know, like, so we do this exercise, which you may have done at a workshop, or you might do it in your own clinical work, or some of you who are listening may have seen. It's called the multiple selves exercise, developed by Paul Gilbert, founder of compassion focused therapy. And you kind of remember an argument or a quarrel, and you imagine what would my, you know, what are the thoughts and feelings and behavioral urges of my angry self from the quarrel? And and then you go back over it. And what about my anxious self? And then the sad self. And then eventually you go to the compassionate self. And we often do this in a group, either training group or a clinical group. And what happens every time is the thoughts and feelings and behavioral urges are self-focused on the angry self. Like, they were wrong, I was right, or I don't need to put up with this. When the anxious self is like, oh, I hope everything works out, I'm so scared. And the sad self is like Eeyore, you know, not again, I can't believe this happened to me. And then you do this compassion imagery, and you evoke this compassionate self, and a stunning thing happens, and it's happened hundreds of times. The thoughts turn to the other. You know, oh, I wonder how they're doing. I wonder if they're as sad about this as I am. I hope that they're okay, or I hope we can work it out. And it's not just because, oh, now you're nicer and before you weren't as nice. It's because you are evoking and stimulating through the vagus nerve and the rate of respiration, heart rate, oxytocin, vasopressin system, all these, like, it's kind of all the plumbing or whatever it is, but you're evoking and embodying a state of caregiving and care receiving and compassion and courage. So all of a sudden you can afford broad repertoires. You can afford broad perspective because you don't have to run away from being killed. So or even the threat, even social threat, or being ostracized or voted off the island. So when Brene Brown says, someone up close, in a way, what she's saying is, when you're socially safe with someone, so I try to bear that in mind with clients. And I also think it helps with my own countertransference when I'm working with a client and someone, who's pushing me away or being aggressive, and maybe I'm trying to help them and they're pushing back. Before I let my ego get involved or my own personal needs, I can stand back and say, what would it be like to be them? It's not like they're withholding other options. They don't have other options at that moment. They're being the version of themselves that's being evoked and instantiated in this moment. And it's a scared, angry version that wants to push me away, even though they desperately want me to be able to be close to them so I might be able to help them. But I can't get there if my threat system is tweaked, So I think that you raise these are really, I'm kind of, there's a circulation here. You're kind of giving me these ideas that we're kind of feeding them back, and hopefully we have an exchange around it.
Yeah, it is. It is so hard when we're in that threat system not to defend, and by defending, making the other person the baddie, right? And that conversation we just had at the beginning, where you said the big sort of gods of compassion focused therapy are capable of this too.
Yeah. Sure.
It's just so human. It's so human to fall into the, to be hit, for our nervous system to be activated, and for us to sort of do the thing that our brains, want us to do, because like you said, ultimately we want to stay safe. And I air quote, stay safe means, protected from others. But, we want to transcend that, because we do, at the beginning you mentioned coming home to our nature, and in a way compassion is our nature, but so is the threat system.
Yeah.
They're both our nature.
Yeah. So part of it is like, this is in Huayan Zen Buddhist, Mahayana Huayan Buddhism does a really great job of talking to this, although the texts are really long and I probably didn't read them stem to stern as perhaps I ought to have. But like the idea that to be awake and to be effective and to be contributing with the time you have on earth is to be a shapeshifter, to sort of being able to, this is psychological flexibility. Like, can I show up as the situation affords? And it's one of the things that for those of you who are, acceptance and commitment therapy, devotees or practitioners or fans, like this idea that how we respond in the present moment and we show up for the present moment with everything that it contains and are open to that, and that we can like not be hooked and hold our stories lightly and endure difficult states of mind and body in the service of the things that matter most to us, in the service of that, and like persist. But the part of the definition that I often forget to add is to persist or break off from the pursuit of valued aims as the situation affords, So I remember being with Matt Villat and Jen and some probably mutual friends, and we're in Milan, and there were, it sounds so, for a New Jersey guy, it sounds so exotic, but you go to a conference and your friends in Italy ask you to go there, and so we're sitting at this restaurant, and there were people who were like coming up to either try to sell us flowers, or maybe were sort of quasi pickpockets, or to like harass a little bit and Matt found it endlessly kind of funny that, again, as a New Jersey and New Yorker who, has publicly disclosed I have PTSD often and has had sometimes a bit of a rough experience in life. When people came up, he kept joking around that I was doing like like Kato from Peter Sellers or something, like I was like, some karate thing, which I didn't mean to be doing that. But when someone came up, I was like, hey, enough, leave me alone. And like, yeah, it's a little embarrassing with your friends to seem that hyper vigilant, but in a way, it was actually the appropriate response. Like based on my entire socialization, we're here together. There's a group of people. Someone's coming up and grabbing my arm. I need to be ready because, as growing up, if somebody did that, that meant they were going to punch you in the face.
That's your history.
Yeah. So it's as the situation. Now then, it's a new situation. So how can I really realize what the situation affords? And getting just back to trying to stick the landing on this for us all, Emma, like just being nice is not actually what is appropriate all the time. We need all those capacities. And I think the thing is to like have those parts of ourselves, but not let those parts have us. They don't drive the bus. They're not in charge. And so to be like a shapeshifter from a place of wisdom and groundedness, and that's why we're coming home to that nature, that awakened nature. It's almost like you're returning to a place of repose or rest, just the way like an Olympic diver might be right before they dive. They don't ground themselves and then take a nap. They like calm, strong, stable, prepared. And that's a foundation for action, whatever that action is.
And it speaks to this idea of the fierce compassion.
Yes.
I seem to be talking about Brené Brown a lot, but she talks about compassion slam dunk. And this idea that from compassion the most compassionate humans are also very good at setting boundaries, saying no, understanding the limitation of the other. If I think of when I'm compassionate with my child, sometimes that includes saying, nah, this is too much for you. I'm going to have to say no, because I know that they can't handle another late night to sort of hang out with friends, or they really do need to sit down and do some work because they'll feel better if they do well. But those moments are hard. There's no warm, fuzzy feelings, real kumbaya. It's fierce in that we have to set a limit coming from that place of deep understanding of the other human, that place of empathy, even when it doesn't feel good. It's not a a moment of, deep connection or loving. It's a connection to that understanding of where this other person can get to, needs to get to, and perhaps needs your help getting to.
There's a generosity in that. I think real generosity in what you're describing, Emma, because your own, I would imagine that you have a desire to be loved and to be a good parent. And one of the ways we can tell if we're good to people around us is whether they think that we're good to them. They actually have a say in whether we're good to them. And with parenting, it's an incredible act of generosity to say, I am going to do something. I'm going to set a limit, which you might not like me as much. I'll say that even to the 7-year-old. Sometimes she'll be like angry at me. She'll say, you're the worst daddy in the world. And I'll say, that's my job today. Today is my job is to do something that makes you say, I'm the worst daddy in the world. So thank you very much. Now I know I did my job. And she's like, didn't like it. But I have to just say, because I just feel really compelled to mention this, like, particularly Paul Gilbert and particularly Bob Leahy in my own life were people who really helped me to accept aspects of my own personality that I thought made me a bad person. My own anger, my own fierce compassion, my own passion around things. Like, especially Paul, the idea that it's not about being nice. It's not about being soft. It's not about being indulgent. It's about evoking something which is very, very strong and allows you to stand for what matters most. And that there's so many, we were talking earlier about what is the dirty little secret. Like, it's been such a long time that I've been attempting, rather with mixed results at best, to express that for me, in my work, the real gift of compassion is courage. The real gift of compassion is that your fears, your anxiety, your social threats can be grounded and stabilized because there is something more important going on, something worth standing up for. And the strength of that comes from that for us all is, to me, that kind of gets lost in self-compassion will let you be kind to yourself, and then you'll be less self-critical. It'll help you to accept your self-critical nature because you'll accept yourself. That's great. You need that. But it's part of the story of compassion. And that's why I don't lean into the self-compassion term. It's not ideological. It's not because, like, I studied CFT more than MSC or FBI and the KGB and all the alphabet soup. It's because working with anxiety, patients and clients with anxiety problems, I've just seen people be so liberated by finding compassionate courage. So it's like you were saying earlier a little bit, Chris, like it takes courage to be compassionate, but also takes compassion to feel courage. To not just regulate or accept your anxiety, but to move like what Rachman described when he talked about fearlessness. There's a big difference for me between fearlessness and regulating anxiety. There's a big difference between fear and anxiety. Like, if you can actually, like, when I worked with like veterans and like the nurses and trauma surgeons who had to deal with actual fear and still persist, like, that's a really cool outcome from therapy or coaching. I mean, look, I'll take like more tolerable anxiety. Yay, that's good. Psychological flexibility, hooray. But if you're actually able to be afraid and still keep going with like some measure of joy in your heart, that's a cool thing.
That's
That
right.
does make me think of parenting.
After I finished my PhD, I went and did a 10-day silent retreat with Stephen Batchelor, who was also on our podcast, another fabulous human. And during this sort of silent retreat, oh my goodness, the emotions. It was actually one of the hardest things I've ever done. I didn't realize that being silent was so, so very hard. But I remember the teacher, she was a beautiful human. She said to me, wait till you parent. That's the biggest dharma. And absolutely. My goodness, we have to navigate so many emotions. And this piece around fierce compassion is one of the hardest parts, actually. I read recently about this idea of ruinous empathy. The idea that When we are kind, we're not in fact being kind. If really what the best thing for our relationship, for our children, for ourselves is to set a limit, is to say no, then that's what being truly kind is, truly empathic, truly compassionate. And it often gets confused. Hence, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, my son saying it's so woke in a way that isn't honest. Not that he wasn't being honest, is a way that when we're compassionate, we can be dishonest. We're not really caring about the other person. We're just making life easier for ourselves. Or the empathy is really about us, perhaps not wanting to upset someone else. Exactly what you said. It's so hard. I loved what you said about the generosity, being a sort of generous parent or doing the good job sometimes is the outcome is our kid says, I hate you. You're the worst parent in the world. I must say girls are particularly good at that. I've got a little girl and she does that really well. My sons haven't said it quite as much. I've had it written on the wall. I've had it written in my book. Great reminders that I've set a limit. But yes.
And up to a point, that's a sign that they're socially safe. That they feel safe being able to say that with you, right? I know you guys are aware of this. I mean, at a certain point, it can be an indicator of something worse, like if someone's acting out violently. So I don't mean it always means that. One thing that's like a little thought exercise I'd love to sneak in, because we've been kind of touching on politics slightly in this incredibly contentious age. So this is just like a little thought exercise that popped into my mind the other day. And like, I guess about 8 years ago, there were a few interviews that I did, which were some of the like more like larger scale things, like for the Washington Post or like NPR. I don't do that typically, but somebody got it in their head that I could talk about people having political disagreements and getting along with each other, even when they had it was for the holidays, like going home for the holidays and you don't want to hate your family. Like, how can you all get along? So there's like a couple of those that happen. And I hearken to them sometimes because I find the whole thing so heartbreaking, the way people are driven apart from each other over these, for legitimate concerns they have. But a little exercise I did with a friend, I was trying to connect with them around holidays. And it was, imagine someone who is you consider to be your political adversary. And imagine this is a person who, one of the reasons they're your political adversary is because they've learned to hate another group of people. They've learned to dehumanize and hate whoever this is. There's somebody who you like them, you love them, but you know that they hate this other group of people based on who they are. And hate is such a scary thing in evolutionary terms because it's actually, as we know, is like closer to disgust than anger. It's about expurgation. It's about removal. It's about destruction of the other and identifying as someone who's totally in opposition to the other. So I kind of invited this friend to just imagine a political adversary and the reason they didn't like them was because that person hated someone. And then think about the times when you hate someone or you hate a group of people. Like, we don't like to admit that ever goes through our minds and hearts, but there's an awful lot of hating others these days that's becoming increasingly socially acceptable. And you might be hearing this from one political orientation and saying, yes, Dennis is talking about them, those folks who hate people based on their identity. But I think the real challenge is to look into our own hearts and say, when am I doing that? When am I hating someone based on their identity? And if we can curb that in ourselves, what a gift we're giving the world to just, we don't have to change our political beliefs. We don't have to change our political allegiances. But if we can move past hating based on identity and open our hearts to like the necessity for the alleviation of suffering for all beings, cooperation and liberation for all beings. It's a challenging thing, but when I do that, it helps me to be able to like exist better, to be better. There's more of an ableness to have more of an open heart, to be more loving, to be less dominated by hate or anger. So that's a little, I don't know. We're talking, some people will listen. If that was one thing that I could add to the conversation, I think that I'd sleep a tiny bit better tonight.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think by doing that, it sort of takes away that urge to be right and to impose our views on this person that is so hateful that we hate them.
Yeah. It's a loop then.
Yeah, it's a loop. And somebody's got to break that loop. Wow. Well, in the interest of time, final thoughts? I mean, this has been marvelous. And I mean, we could continue and get into values and context sensitivity and all kinds of great topics that we've just barely touched on here, but we should wrap up.
From me, I just say I just feel like a couple multiple layers of gratitude about this discussion, because we're a part of a shared community. But one of the really cool things about what you're doing here is it allows for conversations, real human conversations between us. And by extension, the people who are listening are as much of a part of this conversation as the three of us. And that's like a really beautiful and special thing. And I feel like more connected to the two of you and to our shared work and to our community in psychology and in healing professions, and to your listeners who I've never met. So what a magic spell you've created with this ritual, like that we can actually increase how close we are to one another. And that was kind of just what I needed today. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. This has been a real privilege. I've admired your work for many, many years now, and I'm very gratified to hear you say that. Oh, well,
Yeah,
right back at you.
absolutely. What a fantastic conversation, and what an honor to get to have that and sort of inch us a little closer to perhaps being a little bit more compassionate in whatever way it feels right today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, and I hope that we can continue to be connected down the road. Thanks so much. It's really cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.